this be a reminder to you all that this organization will not tolerate failure.
The side of the federal building has been blown off. Jesse?
I don't understand it 'cause you won't say yes, but you don't say no. Saying no, we shouldn't.
They believe they were part of a CIA project called MK Ultra.
I'm getting up on track to sell you things that you ain't buying.
Just like a segment of society that is not living in reality.
In a certain sense, we're kind of a little bit more Israel's vassal state.
There are police chiefs facilitating prostitution networks.
Do you understand? It's all in your head. It's your move.
Good morning. What up, everybody? Welcome to the Morning Dump with Austin Picard from the Underclass Podcast. Man, so already it looks like within the past 24 hours since yesterday's stream, we have had quite a few noteworthy bombshell reports that are cycling through, right? Just, and this new sort of, hey, what's going on, Daniel McLaughlin? What up, brother? Wam Baba, how you doing, my friend? I appreciate you saying that. He says, what up, Austin? Appreciate your work. Lance Ripa, here early, my friend. Bobo McHua, what is going on, brother? All right, so, nah, you haven't been hypnotized. Don't say that. Hey, man, we've all been hypnotized, it seems. We're in this kind of, this, what seems to be an environment that is just oversaturated with kind of perception management techniques, you know, very sophisticated. Think, change, repeat. How you doing, my friend? Hey, Q. Welcome to the Morning Dump, you guys. Yeah, so I don't know where should we start? We have a lot to discuss. Honestly, we have probably too much, which is typical when it comes down to how I kind of over prepare at times. But hey, it's better than it's better than not having enough to discuss. But here's what I think is most interesting about the recent news cycle. It seems like first of all, there was a report of Pentagon war plans for Iran, and that kind of came. Well, I guess I should just briefly mention before we jump into that, because it definitely, I had a couple of things to reference in regard to this upcoming pivot to really the ultimate goal being Iran and a military conflict. Engagement, I would say direct engagement, right, on the world stage. But Daniel McLaughlin says oversaturated gay op on gay op. Yeah, absolutely. How many psyops can they run in a day? Yeah, they are doing their best to kind of ratchet those numbers up, I think. But I'm just witnessing escalations in every single theater of war. It feels in this very moment. And so when you kind of you see the environment for what it is, and you realize that, as we discussed recently, right, kind of this, as far as just these hidden agendas playing out, but also the unacknowledged military strategy that kind of seems to very much influence the direction of a lot of these military conflicts, obviously. And discussing recently the Russian Special Forces operation that utilized that natural gas pipeline to the Brotherhood pipeline to then kind of probe into, in a clandestine manner, into military territory or enemy territory to then, you know, prop up behind the Ukrainian troops and then hem them in to basically a trap. And it kind of forced this ceasefire negotiation in a way. I think definitely the timing is not coincidental, but you see this, and you see this alleged agreement between Putin, the Kremlin, and Zelensky in Ukraine, and man, then you have reports that surface of Ukraine and Russia trading this massive drone attack mid the ceasefire talks, and that's interesting to me, if only because if you didn't see, there's like a pretty large mushroom cloud that was kind of the consequential outcome of that. And what is up, Jose? Jose's in the chat. Hit the like button, everybody. Definitely like, share, subscribe. Hey, say what now, GM? Hey, Q, what's up, brother? Robin is a brat. What up, homies? Yeah, so it looks like on Thursday, Ukraine and Russia traded massive drone attacks amid talks the U.S. has been holding with both sides on reaching a ceasefire. One Ukrainian attack hit an airfield deep inside Russia that houses Russian nuclear-capable strategic bombers. The attack on the airfield in Engels, Russia, reportedly hit an ammunition depot, causing a massive blast and damaging nearby homes in the region. The governor of the Saratov Oblast said the Ukrainian attack on the region was the biggest yet. Saratov and Engels came under the most massive drone attack ever. All emergency services are working hard to clear the aftermath. Governor Roman Bursargin, yeah. According to Russia's TASS news agency, the Russian Defense Ministry said its forces downed a total of 132 Ukrainian drones over Russia, including 54 over the Saratov Oblast. Busargin said 30 homes were damaged in the attack. All right, Ukrainian officials said that Russia fired a total of 171 drones into Ukraine, and said 75 were shot down and 63 were downed by electronic jamming or were lost. Russian glide bombs were also dropped on the Sumy and Kharkiv regions near the Russian border, and at least 2 people were killed. The attacks came after both Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to the idea of halting attacks on energy infrastructure. The partial ceasefire hasn't been officially implemented, and the details are expected to be worked out in the coming days. U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian officials are set to hold talks in Saudi Arabia on Monday to discuss the partial ceasefire. Russia and Ukraine won't engage directly, as the U.S. will hold separate talks with either side. Zelensky has said Ukraine was drawing up a list of facilities that could be subject to the partial ceasefire, that it could include port and rail infrastructure, not just energy infrastructure. These talks are also expected to work toward a ceasefire on attacks in the Black Sea. All right, so the ceasefire is apparently not really being applied, it seems. But yeah, not too shocked, honestly, considering the kind of the bluster and the bloviating coming from the Europeans, really the UK. There's been a lot of really just a lot of kind of verbal war propaganda, and well, far more than that, but just in terms of escalating and continuing the escalation, and in what seems to be an attempt to kind of like misdirect the ceasefire, or at least influence the ceasefire in a negative way, the negotiations. And so yeah, you have European nations and Keir Starmer, and you have all of these different officials, public officials, that have been I believe even just many different European government officials have been making these statements in regard to the further escalation in the Ukrainian theater of war. And so that included, of course, providing European troops to Ukraine. But in reality, it seems like, and a lot of what their messaging was basically, we can't rely on 300 million Americans, right? To it was basically it was basically saying, for our defense purposes, in terms of defending against such a threat as Russia in regard to basically saying, but it was kind of hilarious because I think even one of the European officials even claimed that they kind of threw a jab at Putin at the very same time as kind of making these claims that we need to get out from under and kind of manufacture our own independence for a change in regard to defending ourselves against the Russian threat. And I just found it very interesting because in the very same breath, they kind of accused Russia of not being able to to actually win the battle against such a small opponent in the Ukrainian force. And it was just very much like, again, you, you're playing with the war machine. This is a game to them, and we're just caught up as collateral damage as far as the serfdom and the peasant class is concerned. And that's always been the case, man. They've always been willing, very willing to sacrifice the peasant class to really provide precedence or uh, in many ways, kind of, yeah. Anna Banana, what is going on? Welcome to the morning stream. So I think honestly, the first thing we should discuss because we have a lot of breaking news. There's definitely the Department of Education. We can have that conversation in a moment, but I feel like one of the most important things, foreign policy wise, is being uh, again, we've been warning about this, right? As far as I appreciate you, Steve. Um, yeah, so we've been warning about this pivot to Iran, right? And so once again, we have U.S. Israeli officials meeting for consultations about this exact conflict, right? And let's present this as well as this individual journalist who's apparently former military. He received these Pentagon war plans for Iran, and so that alone is very important and worthwhile in acknowledging. But let's start with this meeting, this consultation over what seems to be an escalation with Tehran. So, Israeli officials are expected to arrive in the U.S. early next week for high level talks about Iran. President Donald Trump had made several threats to Iran in recent days, and the Pentagon is developing war plans for the Islamic Republic. According to Axios, the first meeting of the U.S. Israel Strategic Consultative Group, SCG, since Trump took office is planned for next week. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his team think the odds of a deal are low and want to align on a joint course of action should things escalate to military force, an Israeli official told the outlet. What's up, Sloppy Toppy? Hey, man, thank you so much. He says, hey, good morning, Austin. Glad I found the channel and appreciate you putting out news so often. Of course, my friend. So it looks as if Trump has recently issued multiple threats toward Iran, obviously, which we've covered here on the show. Most recently, he accused the country of backing Yemen's Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis. He warned that if Yemeni attacks on shipping in the Red Sea did not cease, he would strike Iran. Additionally, Trump sent Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei a letter stating that if a new agreement between Washington and Tehran were not reached in 2 months, the chances of U.S. or Israeli military action against Iran's nuclear facilities would dramatically increase. An unnamed former U.S. military officer told journalist Ken Klippenstein. Okay, so it's according to this military officer who informed this journalist that the Pentagon was now reintroducing nuclear deterrence for Iran. One might find it extraordinary to think that nuclear weapons are even considered, but we have entered a new era, said the retired senior officer who was briefed on the planning. The official explained that the new policy stretches back to the Biden administration. Klippenstein additionally reviewed Pentagon documents showing new war plans for Iran, including a wide array of operations from covert action, cyber attacks to nuclear weapons. The SCG was formed in 2009 to be a forum for high-level U.S.-Israeli talks on Iran's nuclear program, while the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, and the U.S. intelligence community have continued to reaffirm that Tehran is not developing nuclear weapons. Washington and Tel Aviv have repeatedly claimed Iran is on the brink of building the bomb. Hey, that's what I was. Honestly, it's kind of hilarious. Anna Banana, Roma Lama, Roma Lama. Yeah, there we Rama Lama. Damn it, I can't read this morning. I'm absolutely exhausted though. But here we go. So she claims that do nukes even exist, and that is a hilarious claim because, hey, as far as much as we know, that nuclear test footage was at least some of it is very questionable in regard to its legitimacy. Um, Especially much of it, believe the vast majority of it was produced by the Lookout Mountain Laboratory, which I think is hilarious. The Laurel Canyon production facility that was very much tied to military intelligence. But yeah, I'm very skeptical myself because I think obviously very large bombs exist. So what really is the difference when it boils down to it? But yeah, and it's a very interesting theory to actually dive down that rabbit hole briefly and question the reality for a moment because there's enough there that makes it seem like it's some substantive in nature to kind of naturally pursue that interest as far as just investigating the reality and credibility of a lot of that. If only due to which, by the way, um, I found it hilarious that yesterday, as I'm playing devil's advocate for a brief moment, God forbid, that I offer kind of like I didn't. I will say that I didn't kind of reinforce my point in the best way in regard to kind of just considering that really what I think is that the theory that Israel was behind the JFK assassination directly, like the prominent key component. It's been well documented and for good reason, obviously. But I mean, you consider like the Numek Apollo affair, Mordecai Vanunu, even, right? Which is what I always think of in terms of Robert Maxwell and the connection to a honeypot operation that essentially kind of, you know, well, it compromised this whistleblower, which was revealing Israel's nuclear weapons program. So obviously, it was very important. This happened in 1986, but I mean, you can go all the way back to the Numek affair, right, in '65. And it's really interesting and important, I think, to you motherfucker, Jose's in the chat stirring the pot, dude. Yeah, he says Ed Kemper's dad was doing those tests, was also a Devil's Brigade guy, World War II Special Forces Death Squad. Point is, nukes glow. Absolutely, my friend. I completely agree. But yeah, the whole and then he says, also we get it. You love Jews. You son of a bitch. Yeah, so the whole point though that I was trying to make is that there is a lot of legitimate credibility, of course, to that being a huge priority in regard to kind of further disguising and not allowing the really the um, what seems to have been like what obviously when you look at the Apollo affair and Numek, right? It's very interesting because you witness that first of all the timing of it 65, then you have this I also discovered recently, which was James D. Eugenio kind of did an entire report on this. It was very important, and it was basically just revealing the fact that Richard Helms, the CIA director, he was presented with the national intelligence estimate stating that Israel had obtained atomic weapon capabilities, discussing the nuclear weapons program in '68. So this was already definitely being discussed, and then of course '86 I mentioned, but what's being discussed in regard to these new revelations in regard to the JFK files has really been about James G. Singleton's testimony in '75, and then of course a lot of his direct connections to setting up this, you know, this seemingly this clandestine Israeli connection, right? As far as the secret Israeli nuclear program. And so it is very strange timing, and it's very obvious that there is an Israel exception in regard to kind of like, even if you look at like the interpretation of many people in this very moment, like influential, prominent individuals, which we know are very compromised, like a Ben Shapiro, which is absolutely hilarious to see his take on the JFK files. Um, and by the way, it almost kind of suggests that really, like, what I think is most important is the reason we didn't get the Epstein files is because the Epstein files implicate people who are currently in power. And I think that the JFK files at this very moment, as they stand, I think the vast majority of people who would be in, at least the priority in regard to kind of holding some individuals accountable. Yeah, I think that it's man, they're long dead. They've been dead and gone. And so that's the kind of the unfortunate circumstance we find ourselves in, right? But anyway, it is still very important that some of this, as far as some of the redacted lines that very obviously revealed the Israeli connection, are being exposed, if only to further reinforce what we already very much were aware of, as far as just this in regard to this Israeli nuclear weapons program. So again, you go back to, what was it, the if you look at what James Jesus Singleton, as far as these new revelations, it's very interesting because obviously this was the documents confirm that this atomic technology and even plutonium was transferred through these various intermediaries. But a lot of this came from the Numek affair, the Apollo affair, which I think a lot of people are a little bit too, you know, just unaffiliated with the details. And Numek refers to, of course, the 1965 incident involving the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation in Pennsylvania, where I think it was Apollo, Pennsylvania, too, which is kind of occult in nature as far as the name itself. But there were, I believe, 200 to 600 pounds of highly enriched uranium went missing, leading to suspicions that it was diverted to aid Israel's nuclear weapons program, obviously. And investigations by various U.S. agencies, including the FBI and CIA, did not conclusively prove the diversion, but that was obviously because there was a cover-up being facilitated. And I know James DiEugenio, like I said, he did an amazing investigative article on this as well and wrote about this many different times. But it's basically how Israel stole the bomb, right? And it details that in 1968, as I mentioned, CIA Director Richard Helms was presented with a disturbing national intelligence estimate stating that Israel had obtained atomic weapons. And so it's very much, as I said before, it's been kind of a well-established theory, right? That but my only point yesterday was basically, and as I mentioned, for good reason, it's basically that the Jewish mob and secret societies play a far more pivotal role as well in regard to kind of the layered special interests. And so I think the most vital role to play is that aspect of the secret society threat, which is, of course, why you have that speech given by JFK, who, warns us of the secret societies, and you have, honestly, the Jewish mob with the connection to Jack Ruby and really a lot of the clandestine operations at the time, which were being really facilitated through the Gladio network that had been, implemented post World War II and the Nazi rat lines. And I had used paperclip kind of as an example, which I feel like was really the flawed point of that, as far as just kind of using that to reinforce my point was flawed inherently, only because I was kind of realizing the fact that after the show, I was like, man, paperclip, like, basically it's kind of Jewish occultists who almost financed, and very much created the Nazi state, right? Which is very interesting. And so that in itself, you have paperclip Nazi recruits drafted by this group of elite Jewish aristocratic dynastic families, which happened to directly sponsor the creation of the Zionist project, which of course ultimately. So as far as just the same exact group of elite Jewish aristocratic dynastic families, which again, this falls back into the willingness to kind of sacrifice the peasant class, right? And this has been commonplace, right? Honestly, it really has been in regard to how the elites function. And so, when it boils down to it, you have uh, man, it honestly reminds me of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, to be honest, right? Because it very much kind of implicates this 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 covert agenda of again, if you're willing, you know, to actually sacrifice an entire group of underclass, which is another reason why I named my podcast this, is because this is class warfare, the class divide that's being represented in more ways than one. And so, yes, I think that it's very important to at least point out that fact that they're very willing, to sacrifice the. I wanted to be an occultist, but I wasn't very good at hiding, says Lance Ripa. What? Why? What's up, Abrogate D's morning dumpers? But yeah, I think that once you become aware of kind of this mentality and psychology of the elite ruling class, the aristocratic dynastic families that have been kind of standing tall behind the political puppets for generations, utilizing this false framework, as far as just misdirect the public perception. I think all of that is very important to understand in terms of kind of making this overall point. But I do think that once 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 you realize that there does seem to be kind of, in regard to the the protocols, right, of the learned elders of Zion. Like if you go back to the fundamental basics of what that was actually kind of offering as far as the ultimate kind of theory behind it, which has very much been deliberately, I think, who knows how legitimate the protocols truly were, which they've been, of course, dismissed as the most anti-Semitic literature that has ever been created and circulated through the public. But if you remember, it first appeared in 1902, and the timing of this falls perfectly within, the Zionist project and the Balfour Declaration, and really kind of the rise of the Israeli nation state. So that alone is important to understand, and so it's of course been deemed a hoax of hate and traced back to Russian anti-Semites and pronounced as a forgery. But Philip Graves of the Times in London is the initial individual who allegedly debunked this Zionist manifesto, and in August of 1921. And this is when he claims it was a literary forgery and plagiarism from the work of Maurice Jolyce, the Jollies, the Dialogue in Hell. But again, it's very interesting because you see the connection between potentially Hitler. You've always heard about Hitler being kind of a bastard Rothschild. It's been theorized and thrown out there as a theoretical possibility, which I think there's far more connections there also than people are aware of. Let's see, Bobo McHoy. Austin, wasn't it the Russian Tsar that first got that published? The elders, yeah, I believe so. Honestly, it was during the pogroms, and it began to circulate at that time. But yeah, it's still, man, like understanding kind of the diabolical framework behind this narrative and this theory. It's that you had an elite group of Zionist Jews who were willing to sacrifice as many peasant class serf Jews as, the serf Jews, as far as like the serfdom class. It's very interesting, but willing to sacrifice as many of them as necessary to essentially kind of set a precedent and receive really kind of this blank check in regard to public perception as well, and sympathy in regard to the world stage. But it is interesting because it allowed them and gave them the precedent to then uh, uh, set up their independent nation state, which was the ultimate goal. And so the entire kind of narrative and theory behind the protocols was that you had this elite established Jewish, group of Zionists, these world Jewish leaders who had essentially came together, known as the Elders of Zion, were conspiring to essentially control really in my mind, well, in this theory, within the framework of this theory, it's truly to control the future of global civilization, honestly. And it's very interesting the level of detail that was put forward in this, because it turns out that the source of this documentation provided to Philip Graves, who allegedly debunked this, the protocols, uh, at the Times in London, by the way, confirming the forgery, just so happened to come from Alan Dulles. So that was the source, Alan Dulles, who was in Constantinople developing relationships and post Ottoman political structures for the OSS. So this is very much within the framework of setting up, the network and the Nazi rat lines, which then imagine, right? Like you finance the Nazi party, right? Then you pull the financing, you allow the crucifixion essentially to take place, and then you provide the clandestine framework to then usher through the as far as just um, protect and what seems to be very much like just as far as just insulate all of the true perpetrators of this most sadistic world conflict in human history, allegedly, right? From, I mean, keeping them from being held accountable. That's alleged. I mean, truly what took place, but also insulating them from not only accountability, but also providing them with typically entire new identities when, in the terms of paperclip, and then kind of implementing them, instituting them into Western society, which obviously we know there was a Nazi draft that took place post World War II. So it's very interesting to me to kind of witness these factions of really. It's hard for me. This is the what I struggle with the most, is trying to identify the warring factions in the clandestine power structure, because we're very much not aware, if I of I think the key perpetrators behind the scenes. We don't know the vast majority of their names. Even when you cover things like the Pilgrim Society, a lot of these individuals are seemingly puppets that are running with an agenda. They have talking points and benchmark items, and they're clearly kind of facilitating this agenda for this very elite group that are remain hidden, behind the veil of public perception. And so I always struggle with trying to kind of identify who truly are, these warring factions, and are they organically and authentically at odds? Are they truly, genuinely opponents within the context of this agenda, or are they only in opposition in terms of the deception and the way that this agenda kind of plays out on the world stage? That is where I'm trying to kind of wrap my mind around a lot of this, but it's a difficult concept to grapple with, obviously. But so anyway, to before I waste the entire show just rambling on this. I should just kind of finish my point here, which is basically that the protocols purport to document the minutes of this late 19th century meeting attended by world Jewish leaders known as the Elders of Zion, who are conspiring to control the world. For example, the protocols include plans to subvert the morals of the non Jewish world, plans for Jewish bankers to control the world's economies through central banking, plans for Jewish control of the press, and ultimately, plans for the destruction of modern civilization. Protocol number 1, the basic doctrine: right lies in might. Protocol number 2, economic war and disorganization lead to international government. Protocol 3, methods of conquest. Protocol number 4, the destruction of religion by materialism. 5, despotism and modern progress. 6, the acquisition of land, the encouragement of speculation. 7, a prophecy of worldwide war. 8, the transitional government protocol. 9, the all-embracing propaganda. 10, abolition of the Constitution, rise of the autocracy. Protocol number 11, the Constitution of autocracy and universal rule. And it consistently goes on. It even it includes the utilization of masonry, heartless suppression of enemies, the nullification of education, the organization of disorder, mutual understanding between ruler and people, the financial program and construction, domestic loans and government credit, the beneficence of Jewish rule, the inculcation of obedience. It's far more interesting because they even kind of refer to themselves in the protocols and the meeting minutes as the head of a snake, which I always found very strange, right? It seems to kind of, in nature, right? Inherently, it seems to be very so used to Jose interrupting with random facts and details. PG, nah, man, he not here today, brother. But yeah, part of the it's very interesting actually reading through the protocols in itself. I think it's kind of important to at some point expose yourself to it, especially when you read through and you realize basically they refer to themselves, as I mentioned, these learned men decided by peaceful means to conquer the world of Zion with the slyness of the symbolic snake, whose head was to represent those who have been initiated into the plans of the Jewish administration, and the body of the snake to represent the Jewish people. The administration was always kept secret, even from the Jewish nation itself. As this snake penetrated into the hearts of the nations which it encountered, it undermined and devoured all the non-Jewish power of these states. It is foretold that the snake has still to finish its work, strictly adhering to the designed plan until the course which it has to run is closed by the return of its head to Zion, and until, by this means, the snake has completed its round of Europe and has encircled it, and until, by dint of enchaining Europe, it has encompassed the whole world. This it is to accomplish by using every endeavor to subdue the other countries by an economical conquest. The return of the head of the snake to Zion can only be accomplished after the power of all the sovereign of Europe has been laid low. That is to say, when by means of economic crises and wholesale destruction affected everywhere, there still have been brought about a spiritual demoralization and a moral corruption. Or there shall have been, okay, sorry, it's very small, and moral corruption, chiefly with the assistance of Jewish women masquerading as French Italians, etc. These are the surest spreaders of licentiousness and the lives of the leading men at the heads of nations. A map of the course of the symbolic snake is shown as follows. Its first stage in Europe was in 429 BC in Greece, were about the time of Pericles. The snake first started eating into the power of that country. The second stage was in Rome in the time of Augustus, about 69 BC. The third in Madrid in the time of Charles V in AD 1552. The fourth in Paris about 1790. The fifth in London from 1814 onwards after the downfall of Napoleon. The sixth in Berlin in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. The seventh in St. Petersburg, over which is drawn the head of the snake under the date of 1881. This snake is now being drawn through the Americas, and in the United States of America, it has been partially identified as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. All these states, which the snake traversed, have had the foundations of their constitutions shaken. Germany, with its apparent power, forming no exception to the rule. In economic conditions, England and Germany are spared, but only till the conquest of Russia is accomplished by the snake, on which at present, 1905, all its efforts are concentrated. The further course of the snake is not shown on this map, but arrows indicate its next movement towards Moscow and Odessa. It is now well known to us to what extent the latter cities form the centuries of the militant Jewish race. Constantinople is shown as the last stage of the snake's course before it reaches Jerusalem. This map was drawn years before the occurrence of the Young Turk, Jewish Revolution in Turkey. Yeah, it's very interesting, man. It is very interesting. You read through this entire thing, and they essentially, the attempted utilization of not only right as might and we are despots and morally undermining the goyim. Like it's very interesting. The peoples of the goyim are bemused with alcoholic liquors. Their youth has grown stupid on classism and from early immorality, into which it has been inducted by our special agents, by tutors, lackeys, governesses in the houses of the wealthy, by clerks and others, by our women in the places of dissipation frequented by the goyim. There's so much that is discussed in this, and it talks about dismantling liberty and equality and fraternity. It's utilizing a demoralization tactic, including pornography, to undermine the moral framework of the Western of the Western man. So you have destructive education arranged for Darwinism, Marxism, Nietzscheism. To us Jews, at any rate, it should be plain to see what a disintegrating importance these directives have had upon the minds of the goyim. It is very interesting stuff. So at some point, you'll have to read through it, but understanding kind of this psychology that you're dealing with, and again, this has been entirely dismissed as a tool of anti-Semitic propaganda. It was implemented by into the Hitler Youth program, obviously, as a means of indoctrination. But yeah, it was curriculum in Nazi Germany at a certain point in time, and it who knows how legitimate this is, but I do know that the Times in London was definitely owned by special interests directly connected to the Rothschilds, and if you have Alan Dulles as the source in Constantinople, discrediting and dismissing the protocol's legitimacy, then who knows how accurate this truly was. Was this the meeting minutes from this original meeting between the learned elders of Zion, who decided? Because a lot of the theories have been that the decision was made. The mass sacrifice would be done. It was necessary in order to provide the precedent, because yeah, in their minds, the Jew was essentially surrounded on all ends, on every side. And but it's very interesting because if you actually kind of yeah, you look into it much further, and you realize that it does seem as if this potentially was, um, at least, because you have, Theodore Herzl, obviously, who's very prominent in regard to his role in the construction of the Zionist project, and, the timing of it all is just too perfect. But once you understand kind of my mentality, I've discussed this multiple times on the show, how I view kind of ideology as being utilized and exploited as a tool of deception. Um, and I think that it's a tool deliberately used by the elite, unelected bureaucrats, the unaccounted aristocracy, right? The individuals that don't make the top Forbes list of the most influential and wealthy people in the world. Those people are hidden from public exposure. We are unaware of who is truly pulling these strings I think for the most part, and understanding that Zionism and Bolshevism, um, I think were very much utilized as again, ideological subversion, right? And and that is seemingly what has taken place, especially if you consider kind of what I've discussed before many different times, but it's the not only what Winston Churchill said, which I recently mentioned on whatever this is, because it kind of explains the difference, right, between it was called Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. And it does it makes distinguishes between the international Jew and Bible believing Jews and national Jews. And and yeah, I think that it's the implication is this kind of Zionist mindset that's being very much represented, in terms of right where we stand in this very moment in time. My God, man, it's very interesting. But let's see. Check Newsweek article about signature reduction in Dennis Bushnell Future Warfare 2025. I will check it out. PG, send it to me as well if you can. I'll go through it. But but what I think is important to understand there is the fact that what was said by uh, the real point was that illustrated kind of what Churchill was trying to make as far as distinguishing between the difference. It was the class warfare, obviously, the difference in who's in control of this overall agenda. It was none other than Aleister Crowley's good friend and Otto Kahn, who happened to be a banker at Kunlub, right? And so it's very interesting. But in his book, basically in 1937, the Comte de Saint Hilaire, who was the French ambassador to London from 1920 to 1924, recalled a dinner conversation with this Otto Kahn, a friend of Aleister Crowley and a partner of Jacob Schiff and Paul and Felix Warburg and Kunlub and Company, who detailed the nature of the dialectical process of pitting two apparent opposites against each other by backing the Russian Revolution while also advancing the cause of global capitalism. So this is kind of my mind, right? This is what ideology is utilized for. It was devised to, you know, again, it's the when you realize that, for example, you say that Marxism is the very antithesis of capitalism, which is equally sacred to us. It is precisely for this reason that they are direct opposites to one another, that they put into our hands the two poles of this planet and allow us to be its axis. So it's legitimately acknowledging that this is how we control your minds. This is how we pit you against each other. This is how we get you to sacrifice your loved ones, your family, your friends for ideas that mean nothing to us, but overall they push the agenda forward. And these two contraries, like Bolshevism and ourselves, find their identity in the international. These opposites, which are at the antipodes to one another in society and in their doctrines, meet again in the identity of their purpose and end, the remaking of the world from above by the control of riches, and from below by revolution. Our mission consists in promulgating the new law and in creating a God, that is to say, in purifying the idea of God and realizing it when the time shall come. We shall purify the idea by identifying it with the nation of Israel, which has become its own Messiah. The advent of it will be facilitated by the final triumph of Israel, which has become its own Messiah. And that is directly linked to, the League of Nations, the Round Table, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the true power structure that's never truly acknowledged in terms of a lot of these scandalous, let's say, for example, the JFK files, right? That's the crux of my point was we shouldn't oversimplify. We can't oversimplify things. It very much could be that the primary reason that the green light was given for JFK to be assassinated was in order to cover up, right, the the Israeli nuclear weapons program that was, and as well as the timing of it, it all makes sense that that was a huge priority. But that being the only reason, that is not how these clandestine operations, and especially something such a kind of a consequential outcome. I feel like operations such as that are always layered in the motivations behind, as far as, so yeah. Anyway, it's the main point I was attempting to make was only that we shouldn't oversimplify, if only to attempt to understand, you know, this powerful group of operators behind the scenes, behind that curtain, pulling the strings that we just, unfortunately, until this entire system is restructured, it seems as if in its current state, it has been implemented to keep those individuals, of such prominent power, hidden from plain sight, right? Out of plain sight, right? Hidden from view. And that way, we consistently worship the false prophets, or we target and, character assassinate, or entirely, let's say, I think it's interesting that everyone will, point to one individual person as kind of the representation and symbol of what is wrong in their minds with the world. And in reality, this is always some sort of naive, childish oversimplification. I feel like it's far more sophisticated and complicated in just in terms of understanding the power paradigm. And yeah, that is my ultimate goal. So again, I feel as if the ideology has been a long-standing tool, right? And I appreciate you, brother Steve. Have a good one, people. Look out for each other. Great show, Austin. Thank you, brother. But yeah, so let's move on because I've been discussing this for far too long, honestly. But what I do think is interesting, as I mentioned, Numek and Mordecai Vanunu, which is very important to understand in these terms of what we've been discussing. And but once again, I think that what has recently been happening in regard to foreign policy and the ultimate pivot to Iran is one of the most important things that we have to discuss, honestly, and happening on the world stage, and especially these Pentagon plans that have just been exposed. But it goes really, when you see these recent reports of this ground offensive and this expansion into Gaza and Israeli attacks, more airstrikes and bombings, besieging the territory, obviously, you have at least 506 Palestinians, including 200 children and 112 women, that have been killed, a total that doesn't account for all the deaths on Thursday. So another 909 people have been wounded, including 303 children and 205 women. And it's a massive child casualties being reported by the health ministry. Align with accounts from healthcare workers treating patients at Gaza's hospitals. Dr. Feroz Sidwa, an American trauma surgeon volunteering at a hospital in Khan Yunis, told antiwar.com that the morning Israel resumed its massive bombing campaign, he and other medical staff operated almost exclusively on women and children. Israeli strikes on Thursday pounded targets across the strip, including residential buildings in Khan Yunis, where at least 20 Palestinians were killed. A 25-day-old baby was recovered from the rubble in Khan Yunis after her family was killed. In Beit Lahia, northern Gaza, at least 10 Palestinians were killed by Israeli strikes. Among the dead on Thursday was a newborn baby. The Israeli military launched an invasion of Beit Lahia as it hit the city with airstrikes. A day earlier, Israeli troops retook the Netzarim corridor, which separates northern Gaza from the rest of the strip. Later on Thursday, the IDF reinvaded the southern city of Rafah. Hamas said on Thursday that it fired a rocket barrage toward Tel Aviv in response to the Gaza slaughter, marking the group's first known attack since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th. The Israeli military said it intercepted one rocket and 2 others fell in open areas. No casualties were reported. On Wednesday, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz made an explicit threat to the civilian population of Gaza, warning they will face utter destruction and devastation if they don't free Israeli hostages and oust Hamas. The U.S. is strongly backing Israel's escalations in Gaza, which includes a total blockade on aid and all other goods entering the territory. Now, coming off of that report, you see that apparently Trump fully supports Israel's Gaza slaughter, which is very worthwhile in acknowledging because, according to the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said Thursday that President Trump fully supports Israel's renewed massive bombing campaign in Gaza, which has killed at least 200 children since Tuesday. The president made it very clear to Hamas that if they did not release all the hostages, there would be all hell to pay, which we've covered at a very deep level. So, but it is still, it's very important to understand that this comes with full support. Leavitt said that President Trump fully supports Israel and the IDF and the actions that they've taken in recent days. And yeah, we're talking about famine amid the Israeli blockade as well. And so this is kind of the current state of things in regard to the Gaza war, right? And, the hell plan for Gaza, as it's been referred to. So the last foreign policy kind of report, I think, worth bringing to the table here is basically that what I had mentioned before, the Iran war plan. And this is exactly, it's Ken Klippenstein who made these bombshell revelations just recently. And I believe the past couple days. 18th is when this came out. So Pentagon gears up for a major war with Iran. And remember, we just recently covered how the new Israeli army chief also, he's making these very similar statements, right? And he's claiming that, the genocide has restarted, which very much has, and that these plans for Gaza are basically in full preparation and being implemented. So President Trump's menu of options for dealing with Tehran now includes one he didn't have in his first term: full-scale war. And yeah, the Israeli army chief also said 2025, the year of war with Iran. And so Pentagon and company contracting documents I've obtained describe a unique joint staff planning effort underway in Washington and in the Middle East to refine the next generation of a major regional conflict with Iran. The new planning effort, sometimes referred to as the SEED project, covers everything from subtle tools like military deception right up to the rather less subtle use of nuclear weapons. The plans are the result of a reassessment of Iran's military capabilities, as well as a fundamental shift in how America conducts war. Though many in the media incorrectly dismissed the recent U.S. attack on the Houthis in Yemen as little more than a continuation of what the Biden administration was already doing, the new Iran war preparations make clear that the U.S. is exploring a far more aggressive approach. Following his successful assassination of Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani in 2020, Donald Trump seems to have taken the lesson that aggressive action is relatively cost-free. The Pentagon, meanwhile, has watched Iran develop into a major missile and drone power over the past decade. Apparently, this is hardly anyone believes any longer that Iran is interested in any kind of ground invasion of its neighbors. The previous planning assumption, Iran's nuclear program, is also no longer the Pentagon's highest concern. The war, in many ways, is already here. The combination of narrow, pinprick attacks by proxies, Iran's various covert and influence campaigns, and its use of proliferation of long-range drones and missiles, especially to Russia, and assumptions as assumptions about Iran as a military threat have shifted, so too have attitudes about the American way of war. Countering Iran's constant efforts takes the combined effort of the military, the CIA, cyber and space agencies, and the departments of the Treasury and State. No war today is fought solely by the military. The war plan emphasizes a holistic approach to planning, coordination, and synchronization of U.S. government activities, says one document. CENTCOM, the Pentagon's regional command responsible for the Middle East and Iran, is tasked with creating a family of plans that incorporate U.S.-only bilateral and multilateral operations with partners and allies, according to the documents. As activities around the ISIS war and now support for Israel and Gaza has shown, war planning has to be more multilateral in nature, taking into consideration everything from the use of allied bases and airspace to gaining political support for the fighting. The new war plan construct is itself brand new in that the multilateral component includes Israel working in unison with Arab Gulf partners for the first time, either indirectly or directly. The plan also includes many different contingencies and levels of war, according to the documents, from crisis action, meaning response to events and attacks, to deliberate planning, which refers to set scenarios that flow from crises that escalate out of control. One document warns of the distinct possibility of the war escalating outside of the United States government's intention and impacting the rest of the region, demanding a multifaceted approach. As a result, CENTCOM has been tasked with the creation of a set of strategies, campaign plans, commanders' intents, concepts of operation, theater plans, operations orders, and synchronization efforts to incorporate all interested and involved parties. So it looks like the various planning documents being reworked include Global Campaign Plan for Iran. GCPI addresses the most pressing trans-regional and multifunctional strategic challenges across all domains, including conventional and special operations forces, air, ground, sea, subsea, cyber, and space warfare. So again, it looks like the overall point that we should kind of come away with from this is definitely that we are pivoting toward a military conflict directly involving Iran. So who knows how much we will continue to rely on these proxy forces to wage this conflict. I mean, obviously it will continue, but I would imagine that the next stage will definitely include a direct military engagement with Iran itself. So yeah, the fact that these war plans have now been exposed to the public, and again, this is very much a joint operation, right? It seems as if in nature, right? This is obviously a multifaceted and a multilateral benchmark as far as this new war plan is concerned. So not at all surprised that the pivot is effectively taking place. But with that being said, I think it's time we can kind of pivot into a different direction and discuss maybe the Department of Education, right, being closed down, because I do think that at least dismantled. It's very interesting to note because again, I've mentioned this before, but I'm kind of under the impression that this falls perfectly within. Uh, I'm pretty sure nukes are real, says Saturn V. That's funny. So, but yeah, I mean, once you understand kind of the ultimate agenda playing out here, right? Which this falls perfectly in line with what can be called, the Trump Education 2025, right? Which is kind of once you kind of realize this school choice corporatization that is playing out, it raises some eyebrows in my mind in regard to the questioning of this narrative being kind of like how it's being trotted out to the public is that obviously this is the spin would have us believe that it's an effort to reduce the federal role while empowering the states. But yeah, I'm not quite certain that's actually the case. And let's see here. We have a few different examples of how that is. How that is at. If you look at Unlimited Hangout, of course, you have Whitney Webb kind of has made a phenomenal point in regard to this really the restructured education system, and so first of all, we should at least introduce this concept, and or just allow Trump himself and also the press secretary. Oh, I thought it was hilarious because there's a Fox News segment about the dismantling of the education department, which is pretty entertaining as well. But let's check this out briefly.
Caroline, what do you say to critics of the president's education plan? Caroline, what do you say to critics of the president's education plan?
Where was their criticism of our nation's failing test scores for the last several decades? The Department of Education was founded in the 1970s, and since then we have spent more than $3 trillion at this federal bureaucracy. What has been the return on that investment for the American taxpayer? Levels that are less than ideal, less than proficient. Our children's test scores are incredibly concerning when it comes to reading rates, literacy rates, math, and science test scores. The numbers prove that, and the president is finally, this president is finally taking much needed action to return education to where it belongs, and that's to educators closest to students in their classrooms in their respective states. We're going to have a great event here later at 4 o'clock. There will be students here, teachers here, parents here, educators, and of course, governors from around the country who are very excited about taking on this responsibility to educate our nation's students.
Who's going to run federal student loans?
So the Department of Education will be much smaller than it is today. As you know, the president's executive order directed Linda McMahon to greatly minimize the agency. So when it comes to student loans and Pell Grants, those will still be run out of the Department of Education, but we don't need to be spending more than $3 trillion over the course of a few decades on a department that's clearly failing in its initial intention to educate our students.
So is the federal government going to be spending
much
less?
smaller than it is it not going to be shut down completely? And then I have a second question.
As I said, Pell Grants and student loans will still be run out of the department in Washington, D.C., but the great responsibility of educating our nation's students will return to the states.
And the Department of Education plays a critical role in enforcing civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination. Who's going to do that now?
Any critical functions of the department, such as that, will remain. But again, we're greatly reducing the scale and the size of this department.
What about federal Title I funding and special?
Ma'am, it is. I love the messaging as far as, of course, the Department of Education is, I think it's a cancer plaguing modern society. And basically, it's been a system of indoctrination, obviously, and ideological subversion. Also, been a very viable tool in terms of infiltrating the family unit and essentially kind of destroying and undermining a lot of our basic fundamental core principles, just ethically, I believe. So yes, I am always in favor of dismantling a federal agency. Okay, so don't get me wrong, that is definitely my perspective on that. But I do believe that this is far more likely a pivot into this sort of, what I think is very much kind of restructuring the system of education to fit the model going forward in regard to the upcoming dystopian technocratic state. So I believe the technocracy is always waiting in the wings. I believe that essentially we are kind of witnessing, the key aspects of the agenda benchmarks being really implemented in real time. It's just about acknowledging them as we kind of tiptoe down that totalitarian path, and unfortunately it seems like most people are unaware of these the diabolical overarching agenda that seems to be taking place here, which very much has to do with the 15-minute smart city infrastructure, the new, obviously these new suggestions of AI government, which is so much within the framework of Minority Report. It's laughable, but still, people are actually, actually running with this narrative as if it's a plausible alternative and a viable solution to the present system. And I think that is at least a part of the deception in itself, is to kind of, again, problem, reaction, solution. You have the solution waiting in the wings when you manufacture the problem and coerce the reaction, and so therefore the public and the average individual who falls within the underclass, unbeknownst to them, they will, of course, I mean, it's kind of predetermined that they will inevitably succumb to the trap. So it's still, oh man, yeah, it's I definitely think that the press secretary is she's perfect for Trump, honestly. She does a pretty good job, to be honest, as much as I don't appreciate any government officials. It's kind of hilarious to watch them kind of fulfill their roles in the administration. But yeah, let's listen to this guy who of course goes on Fox News and his take on the Department of dismantling the Education Department. But of course, this tweeted by Elon Musk, also worth mentioning.
Well, as we know, the Department of Education here in Washington, D.C. is overwhelmingly staffed by radical left Marxist bureaucrats who are in every way hostile to Western civilization, hostile to American interests, and hostile to our founding documents and culture. And so they are using their position and influence inside the Department of Education to try to force agendas like radical gender ideology, like critical race theory, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all kinds of anti-America curricula and policies on the American people, on our students, on our children. So it's taking away from parents the ability to control and direct the education of their own kids, of their own families. So what we're going to do under President Trump's leadership and direction is to return that authority to the greatest extent possible to the local level where parents can control outcomes, while at the same time making sure that no federal funds are used to support racism, to support gender ideology, or support other ideas and principles that are offensive to the American taxpayer.
Yeah, that sounds great. I hope that's actually the case, but it very much seems as if there is again a hidden agenda playing out as far as just in this context specifically. And let's see, The Hill reported, just to kind of introduce the really, I think, kind of the bare bones details, the important fundamental details in regard to this executive order aimed at dismantling the U.S. Department of Education. But yeah, it does seem that way. Anna Banana Ramalama says DEI is both a real deterioration of everything and a distraction for normies to be angry about. 100%. I think the culture war, to a large extent, is manufactured as a manufactured crisis, to very much distract us from grappling with the true, just the actual underlying issues that are truly affecting us. I think that we spend the vast majority of our time arguing about the minor details in regard to really just effective propaganda, and defending various lines of false narratives, and it makes no sense why you would defend the political class at any level. But so it looks like, according to The Hill, this let's see. Oh no, let's see. We'll run with the Reuters report first. So, Washington, Trump signs order aimed at dismantling U.S. Department of Education. So, this executive order, Washington, March 20th. Trump is flanked by students and educators. That was a funny scene. U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday signed an executive order intended to essentially dismantle the federal Department of Education, making good on a long-standing campaign promise to conservatives. The order is designed to leave school policy almost entirely in the hands of states and local boards, a prospect that alarms liberal education advocates. So Thursday's order was a first step to eliminate the department, Trump said at a signing ceremony in the East Room at the White House. Shuttering the agency completely requires an act of Congress, and Trump lacks the votes for that. We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states, where it belongs, said Trump in front of a colorful backdrop of state flags. Young students invited to the event sat at classroom desks encircling the president and signed their own mock executive orders alongside him. The signing followed the department's announcement last week that it would lay off nearly half of its staff, in step with Trump's sweeping efforts to reduce the size of a federal government he considers to be bloated and inefficient. I like the messaging. Education has long been a political lightning rod in the U.S. Conservatives favor local control over education policy and school choice options that help private and religious schools, and left-leaning voters largely support robust funding for public schools and diversity programs. But Trump has elevated the fight to a different level, making it part of a generalized push against what conservatives view as liberal indoctrination in America's schools, from the university level down to K-12 instruction. He has sought to re-engineer higher education in the U.S. by reducing funding and pushing to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion policies at colleges and universities, just as he has in the federal government. Columbia University, for example, faced a Thursday deadline to respond to demands to tighten restrictions on campus protests as preconditions for opening talks on restoring $400 million in suspended federal funding. Which, by the way, that reminds me. I thought it was kind of ridiculous, but of course, you have a report that came out that basically says, should anti-Israel protests be legal? What a new poll finds. This is according to the Tri-City Herald, and basically it claims that in this latest Economist YouGov survey, a strong majority of GOP respondents, 73%, said they support Americans' ability to protest against actions they view as unjust. Just 12% said they oppose this, and 14% said they weren't sure. But when asked if it should be legal or illegal to protest against Israeli actions in Gaza, less than half of Republicans, 42%, said it should be legal. Meanwhile, 23% said this kind of public demonstration should be illegal, and 35% said they were not sure. The poll conducted March 16th through the 18th with 1,618 U.S. adults found support for protests was more consistent among Democrats and independents. What's up, PJR? How you doing, brother? 86% of Democrats and 81% of independents said they backed the right to demonstrate against actions perceived as unjust. While less than 20% of both groups said they opposed this or were unsure. When it came to anti-Israel protests, 73% of Democrats said they should be legal, while 5% said they should be outlawed and 22% said they weren't sure. Majority of independents, 57%, all said they should be legal, while 9% said they should be illegal and 34% said they didn't know. Yeah. On a bright note, 33% believe polling should be illegal. Honestly, yeah, it is. Polling is legitimately just kind of perception management in itself. It's largely a tool, but still, it is very interesting to realize that, as Glenn Greenwald put it, there's very much an Israel exception when it comes to the conservative movement in America. And so there's a very large blind spot, and it kind of resembles the Star of David. But no, it's very interesting to the very least kind of understand what is happening, this environment we find ourselves in this very moment, especially coming off of the Mahmoud Khalil, what looks like some sort of intelligence operation that very much provided a precedent for violating First Amendment free speech rights, obviously constitutional rights, and all of the justification, of course, being anti-Semitism. So that is the goal here, and I think the violation and infringement will continue. But in regard to this this education, the plan for dismantling the Department of Education, as I said, I'm on board. I'm just only concerned about the potential replacement, right? Like what will replace the current structure? And inevitably, it seems as if it inherently we cannot seem to distance ourselves from the dystopian framework. So I'm very much concerned that is in the cards, and so, but it is important again. President Trump signed an executive order Thursday, but Linda McMahon, right, the education secretary, she's been tasked with the dismantlement of the Department of Education as much as she can, carving a path of legislative and legal fights to come. So that is another point worth mentioning, is that a lot of this is going to be hashed out in courts, all of it actually, which is another reason why the USAID firings and DOJ cuts, right, that affected USAID. It's all being like overruled now by judges at the state level, and it's very interesting. federal level as well. Yeah, it's just strange to witness this taking place. So obviously these budget cuts aren't being signed into legislative action or signed into law in any real fashion. So I think a lot of this is very much window dressing. Kind of it just seems as if much of this is smoke and mirrors, and there's really not too much being done in as far as the any sort of real positive, you know, optimism in regard to our path forward. I think that most of this has been, disingenuous as far as its representation to the public. So, yeah, truly, man. District court judges think they have executive power over the president and SCOTUS. They're sadly mistaken. This is screwed up Jefferson Davis. Yeah, buddy. I think that we have a lot of very corrupt judges in this country, obviously. I think, not only this country, but it's just kind of the nature of the injustice system. It's really a pay to play scam. Honestly, it's who who your attorneys know truly is is what matters most. So when it comes down to seeking justice, yeah, you're far more likely to witness the miscarriage of justice than you are to actually witness any sort of like true yeah, I definitely no sort of lawful accountability takes place as far as my mind is concerned. But PJR says, I feel everything is window dressing. You're right, Austin. He really is the emperor with no clothes. Yeah, this is. I'm interested to see who comes after Trump, because the pendulum swings. We know this. It's the system is structured in this very way, to, in my mind, always achieve what the other side cannot. So once one political puppet kind of is exhausted as far as their usefulness in this current framework, then then there's always another waiting in the wings as well, and they're entirely compromised. And so I'm very interested to see who comes after Trump. And by the way, I've always been under the impression that it would be very difficult, I think, but who knows, man? I mean, is that you see that if Kamala even had a chance, the idea that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that AOC couldn't somehow become a future president, God forbid. I'm just saying that is legitimately possible, right? So you never know. You never know what will happen, and we already know that Gavin Newsom is a huge it's always has been considered at least a rising star on the left, and I guarantee you that the timing of his podcast is by design, in many ways, to try and kind of rebrand his image leading up to the next presidential cycle in regard to the election cycle. And and so who knows who will be trotted out, and at the very least kind of subconsciously embedded into the minds of the public going forward as far as potential viable candidates. So, and you also never know who. I mean, Michelle Obama could be on the short list still. Just started a podcast with or Michael Obama just started a podcast with his brother, I guess, right? Which seems like a sister, because it's so hilarious looking at the dynamic between those two, but very strange. But I hope I'm wrong about that being a viable candidate, as far as just the public actually, I think that there is a lot of support on the left for those individuals who I just mentioned. And so you will have much more support than I think Kamala actually. There was no galvanized support in regard to her. It was all just reactionary to Trump. And in my mind, an ideology. It was really just like, hey, we have no other option, whatever option other than Trump, and that clearly was the mentality of the left during this previous election cycle. But so again, it's whoever they decide, honestly, and yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I don't think Michael Obama has much political capital right now. And I know there's still members of the kind of the liberal establishment, at least like kind of the ideological, who share that bent, ideologically, especially the more like boomer con types that are on the left. They still, I think, very much, admire Michelle Obama for some strange reason, but beyond that, I think she's lost a lot of her appeal, as far as just public appeal. But so anyway, Trump's directive on this massive reduction in the education department's workforce, which McMahon described as the first step toward a total shutdown. This is exciting. I think they attempted to kind of cut the Department of Education in half, basically, to start. So there's some positivity and optimism here in regard to that, but here is where I would like to kind of introduce the potential threat, right? Which is TrumpED. So this is according to John Klysek, February 13th. He wrote this investigative piece predicting this alignment with Project 2025, Trump pledging to eliminate the Department of Education and replace it with school choice rather than end federal control of education. Project 2025 education policy threatens to expand both government and corporate control of schooling in order to streamline ed technocracy for the fourth industrial revolution. So there we go. This is where I kind of, again, I always end up back in this sort of outline of the overarching agenda that we discuss so very often in regard to the technocracy. And I'm concerned that again, when you see the restructuring of these systems, that it's all within the vein of problem reaction solution, right? And implementing the pivot toward the totalitarian technocracy, and that in itself, understanding the measures, the key measures within the fourth industrial revolution, should raise the eyebrows of an individual who has been exposed to this, unfortunate agenda. And so, according to this, Trump publicly stated, of course, I know nothing about Project 2025. Now, I think Project 2025 is kind of just, it's been more utilized as a propaganda tool on the left. But there is legitimacy and credibility to it, at the very least, this kind of agenda taking place. But anyway, so he says he has no idea who is behind it. He disagrees with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Obviously, those statements are contradictory, for if Trump is truly oblivious to the machinations of Project 2025, then how can he honestly disavow its policies, especially if he didn't actually read the official playbook mandate for leadership, Project 2025? So, while contemplating the answer to this question, consider that Project 2025 contributor Russell Voigt was recorded with a hidden camera which caught him saying that Trump's public distancing from Project 2025 is merely a feint intended to deflect and placate his opponents in media and politics. Meanwhile, at least 29 Project 2025 contributors, including the project's director Paul Dans, have served under Trump in official positions across various levels during his first presidential administration. Moving forward into Trump's second term, many of his picks for high-level officials in his executive branch are contributors to the project. These include cabinet appointments such as John Ratcliffe, who's the director of Central Intelligence, and Russell Voigt, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget. Other appointments include Tom Hallman, who is Trump's border czar, and Brendan Carr, who's the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Altogether, this constellation of Project 2025 contributors orbiting Trump indicates that his administration will be adopting at least some of the project's directives, such as the mass deportation operation already being carried out by Haman. Okay, but concerning education policy, Linda McMahon, of course, Vince McMahon's wife, to serve as the Secretary of Education. McMahon did not contribute to Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation, which oversaw the publication of the project, has been funded by America First Works Incorporated, where McMahon serves as the board member and a senior advisor. McMahon, like Trump's previous Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has led several nonprofit corporations such as America First Works Incorporated and the America First Policy Institute, which advocate for public-private school choice partnerships that are also championed in Project 2025. In anticipation of her secretarial confirmation, McMahon already met with multiple members of Congress. Remember, this is in February that this report was published, but yeah, absolutely. JD Vance was put, Sloppy Toppy says Vance was put in place by Thiel. 100%. Yeah, the Peter Thiel acolytes surround Trump right now in this very moment, and that is not by accident. Another reason why it's very, very important for us to consistently spotlight, these benchmarks as they're achieved, right? Because how else are we going to kind of witness firsthand in real time the agenda taking shape? It's the only way. So, in anticipation of her secretarial confirmation, she already met with multiple members of Congress, including Mike Lee, Dave McCormick, Tommy Tuberville, and obviously the consequences of this agenda are very much taking shape in this moment. So, far from abolishing government control of schools, the project 2025 plan to disband the education department would only restructure the bureaucracies involved in administering federal education entitlements. Here we go. So this is the smoke and mirrors. This is the deception, right? It looks as if this could very well be another example of problem reaction solution in this very deceptive, as far as the just understanding that, of course, the vast majority of us, I would imagine, who are in this chat, at the very least, would agree that you would prefer, the federal government to be kind of removed from the equation. But yeah, it seems as if this is the kind of the ultimate propaganda tool that they are kind of exploiting here. And so this includes in the meantime, right? Project 2025 school choice reforms, which include federal education savings accounts, ESAs, will likely expand government control over private schools, including religious schools and homeschooling, while also publicly subsidizing education technology corporations, EdTech corps. At the same time, Project 2025 school choice tax credits are primed to expand the corporatization of education through public-private partnerships that leverage EdTech to data mine how Pay for Success PFS impact scholarships streamline student outcomes for the social credit economy of the fourth industrial revolution. Holy shit. So that's it. To be sure, I have documented extensively in a litany of articles in my book, School World Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education. And again, this individual's name is John Klysek. Klysek, I believe is how you pronounced it. And school choice is nothing more than a euphemism for an array of public-private partnerships that corporatize government education by funneling tax subsidies into private schools, charter school companies, and edtech businesses. Rather than foster curricular freedom independent of federal control, Project 2025's menu of school choices is primed to restrict options to government regulated private schools, charter education companies, and ed tech corporations or corporate managed PFS scholarships, which data mine students' learning analytics for social credit commodification in the digital economy of the fourth industrial revolution. In fact, key architects of Project 2025 are entrenched in the state policy network, an old swamp of neoconservative and beltway libertarian think tanks that has long been bankrolled by Koch brothers philanthropy to push public-private school choice, corporatization, and social impact finance, which are integral to the planned stakeholder economy of the fourth industrial revolution. Yeah, so this very much seems like yeah, public schools are trash, absolutely. My definitely the most concerning aspect of this is kind of the infringement, obviously the what seems to be um, the direct infringement upon homeschooling as well, which that is not at all ideal in the grand scheme of things. So beyond that, we have another line of investigation that is worth mention, and that is, of course, what I just witnessed in regard to the Operation Chokepoint and this digital asset summit, because again, this falls perfectly in line with the very same agenda that we just outlined within the framework of public education, or just the education department in general. And except this is again tying in the digital, really the digital monetary supply, the pivot to, again, I believe that a key component within the technocracy is the digital financial system. Which, hey, I'm not saying that there's not any viability in terms of certain crypto coins, and I'm just very suspect of the blockchain in general, because I think that the blockchain was essentially manufactured by the intelligence apparatus. Is definitely compromised in my mind, which was the ultimate goal of what seems to have been Operation Chokepoint, because there was Operation Chokepoint 1.0 and Operation Chokepoint 2.0, and they both kind of dealt with different priorities as far as their intended priorities. And so, first of all, let's introduce this concept with just Trump's, his appearance at this digital asset summit, and kind of his vision going forward for the American monetary system.
A very big hello to everyone at the Blockworks Digital Assets Summit. It's an honor to speak with you about how the United States is going to dominate crypto and the next generation of financial technologies. And it's not going to be easy, but we're way ahead. Just 2 weeks ago, we hosted the first ever White House Digital Asset Summit, bringing together many of the world's top leaders in crypto for a conversation led by our White House AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, who's a fantastic and very brilliant guy. That same week, I signed an order creating the brand new strategic Bitcoin reserve and a U.S. digital asset stockpile, which will allow the federal government to maximize the value of its holdings instead of foolishly selling them for a fraction of their long-term value, which is exactly what Biden did. He got a fraction of their value. We're ending the last administration's regulatory war on crypto and Bitcoin, and that includes stopping the lawless Operation Chokepoint 2.0. Operation Chokepoint went beyond regulation, and I mean far beyond. It was a form of lawfare through government weaponization. Frankly, it was a disgrace. But as of January 20th, 2025, all of that is over. I've also called on Congress to pass landmark legislation creating simple, common sense rules for stablecoins and market structure. With the right legal framework, institutions large and small will be liberated to invest, innovate, and take part in one of the most exciting technological revolutions in modern history. It's so big, it's, I think, as big as you can get. Pioneers like you will be able to improve our banking and payment system and promote greater privacy, safety, security, and wealth for American consumers and businesses alike. You will unleash an explosion of economic growth, and with the dollar-backed stablecoins, you'll help expand the dominance of the U.S. dollar, and many, many years to come, it'll be at the top, and that's where we want to keep it. We only want to keep it at the top, always. I can already see that the energy and passion of the crypto community is the kind of spirit that built our country, and it is exciting to watch as you invent the future of finance. And right here, it's going to be right here in the USA, the good old USA. Together, we will make America the undisputed Bitcoin superpower and the crypto capital of the world. Thank you. Good luck. God bless America.
All right. So, on top of this, you have to keep in mind something that I found very interesting, which is basically the strategic Bitcoin reserve that he had just mentioned, right? Which essentially this initiative includes acquiring and holding Bitcoin as a long-term asset, aiming to maximize the value of government-held digital assets, which, you know, that makes sense in this context. But once you kind of realize that basically there is this Operation Chokepoint is far more interesting than I think than people are aware of, and understanding that Howard Lutnick, the individual who has been essentially tasked with steering the stable coin as far as the new purchasing of U.S. treasuries, and he's the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and was recently, as far as his links and connections to a strategic partner, Satellogic is what it's called, a strategic partner of Peter Thiel's Palantir Technologies, of course. Lutnick is personally invested in this public-private surveillance state that is governed by U.S. and Israeli intelligence agencies. And Howard Lutnick, has an even more significant conflict of interest because, as I mentioned, he is steering this company, Cantor Fitzgerald, to back Tether, this U.S. Stablecoin, right? And as far as USDT, the Tether itself is a stable coin that is increasingly purchasing the U.S. treasuries. And as we move toward the era of digital currencies, the U.S. government project to save its debt-laden dollar and its fragile economy is closely tied to these stable coins. So as Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick is positioned to guide the development of markets toward the new U.S. digital economy. And that is really what I think is playing out in regard to this particular agenda. And so once you discover that, by the way, Andreessen, right? He goes on, Mark Andreessen goes on Joe Rogan, and he discussed at a certain point, he discussed Operation Chokepoint. And I found what he had to say very interesting, because it's what he's discussing is Operation Chokepoint 1.0, and I think he actually mentions 2.0 as well, but he's discussing it in a way that is far different than I think it should be interpreted, but it makes a lot of sense because, of course, Andreessen himself is personally invested in this narrative and in how it's being presented. And so, yeah, I mean, you can't quite trust what he's saying specifically as being the full picture of what Chokepoint actually was and the intention behind the operation. But let's listen to his introduction of this operation on Rogan.
This started about 15 years ago with this thing called Operation Chokepoint, where they decided to, as marijuana started to become legal, as prostitution started to become legal, and then guns, which there's always a fight about. Under the Obama administration, they started to debank legal marijuana businesses escort businesses, and then gun shops, just like your gun manufacturers, and just like you're done, you're out of the banking system. And so if you're running a medical marijuana dispensary in 2012, like you, guess what? You're doing your business all in cash, because you literally can't get a bank account, you can't get a Visa terminal, you can't process transactions, you can't do payroll, you can't do direct deposit, you can't get insurance. Like none of that stuff is, you've been sanctioned, right? None of that stuff is available. And then this administration extended that concept to apply it to tech founders, crypto founders, and then just generally political opponents. And so, yeah, so that's been.
He's of course speaking about the Biden administration at this point. It was just prior to the election, and the obviously the shift in power in DC and the new administration.
Like super pernicious.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, 100%. And it's called, so it was Operation Chokepoint 1.0 was 15 years ago against the pot and the guns. Chokepoint 2.0 is primarily against their political enemies and then to their disfavored tech startups. And it's hit the tech world like we've had like 30 founders debanked in the last 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a big recurring pattern.
30.
This is one of the reasons why we ended up supporting Trump. It's like we can't live in this world. We can't live in a world where somebody starts a company that's a completely legal thing and then they literally like get sanctioned, right, and embargoed by the United States government through a completely unaccountable, by the way, no due process. None of this is written down. There's no rules. There's no court. There's no decision process. There's no appeal. Who do you appeal to, right? Like who do you go to get your bank account back?
So obviously the way he just portrayed this Operation Chokepoint is a bit different than it's accurate, but it's a bit different than how it should be truly understood. Like, because it very much seems as if first of all, there was an unredacted FDIC. Essentially, there's a letter to members of the board, right, for the federal. It's interesting because this letter reveals that federal regulators are preparing a transaction rules, right, for one specific blockchain network, and so that alone is a very strange connection to, again, being very skeptical of the blockchain as it's currently structured. Not as it's currently structured, just in general. Honestly, I've been very concerned about the reality of the blockchain just being compromised. I would imagine understanding the Inslaw Promise software scandal and how a lot of these tech startups function in the first place. Like, it is legitimately how this system was structured, right? So I think that there's a built-in mechanism of the system itself being inherently compromised, and if only for the federal level, right? For in my mind, obviously, you have government assets who will consistently be able to utilize that as a tool. So yeah, once again, you have this what looks like this entire agenda was launched to further the adoption and interoperability of redacted to facilitate the transfer of value on a blockchain. And it goes a little bit deeper as well, which goes to show that FDIC, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, and the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, collectively federal regulators, the federal regulators understand as a result of the conference call that the redacted is currently drafting operating rules to govern transactions on the redacted blockchain network. But it's been represented as basically this is the exposure of one single government sponsored blockchain network that would be entirely controlled by the state. And if BlackRock's spot ETF application, by the way, which it seemingly was approved, it is apparently Operation Chokepoint 2.0 was potentially strategically orchestrated to drive out crypto native companies and bring in large traditional firms that are, of course, a part of the revolving door with the U.S. government to try and control crypto and Bitcoin specifically as well. But still, that alone is something that I think is very important to acknowledge and understand, that it's at least a viable, like as far as a viable tool of deception, and also another key component in the framework of the technocracy, which obviously a cashless society is a huge goal within that agenda. So, but yeah, um, other than that, man, there's a few different additional things that we can discuss. I definitely know that. Oh man, like I discovered that Shawn Ryan is at it again, which is hilarious. I was in no way prepared for this, but apparently he and Sarah Adams, which, as we've discussed before, Shawn Ryan seems to glow like the sun, and seems as if he's very much a part of the really just key disinformation operatives that have been kind of compromising the alternative media landscape, and at the very least being the sole contributor to a lot of these false narratives, and kind of providing again some sort of justification for a lot of these government misconceptions in regard to a lot of these government agendas. And so, and this is where we got the right, the warning of the upcoming year of domestic terrorism that we have to face in regard to this specifically 2025. So this is all to do with with Syria and Jelani's command, right, in Syria. And what I thought was hilarious was it was described as by Boltzmann Booty, he on Twitter, 12 ball, described this as CIA lady goes on CIA podcast to advocate for CIA regime change against the guy the CIA probably put in power in Syria like 3 months ago. I thought that was just perfect, because that's exactly what took place essentially. And the quote is, Christians are being massacred in Syria under Jelani's command. His army is actually slaughtering Christians. They're slaughtering Muslims and other religious minorities in Syria. Unless President Trump takes action, this is something that will continue very rapidly. Remember, Jelani was a member of ISIS. So it is oh my God, hold on. We have to listen at least for a moment. We have to listen to this, because these are the spooks oversaturating the media landscape. And
Christians are being
Jelani
we can't trust our eyes and ears anymore, you guys.
plans to ethnically cleanse the Christians, the Alawites, the Kurds.
And under his command, his army is actually slaughtering Christians.
How many Christians have been executed?
Gosh, there's like over 40,000 ISIS members in these camps.
They are killing lots of Christians right now.
Should we be?
So Al-Qaeda, and specifically Hamza bin Laden.
All right, so it's far too long to actually watch any of it, but again, I felt like it was very important to at least kind of provide, the example of what these spooks are truly doing, as far as they're attempting to usher through the manufactured consent for more regime change operations, more of a footprint in the Middle East, more of an escalation in terms of Israeli interests in the region as well, which they perfectly align with U.S. interests in my mind at this point, because otherwise, you're witnessing what seems to be the ultimate implementation of, as I've said many times, the globalist agenda. This is the New World Order. This is how you implement that structured, outcome. You have to, you have to stage this right at the local level for when you've witnessed kind of the slow roll of this agenda for so long, and you start to recognize the patterns, then it truly does become undeniable that this is the unfortunate path we're on, despite who we are allowed to vote for. And that's truly how I view this system as it's currently structured. Is, we've been, voting is the opiate of the masses, right? It's the placation tool. It's how they placate the revolutionary class while keeping us, unhealthy, sick, in this cycle of demoralization and weak-minded, psychologically weak-minded. We've been targeted and at every level of our existence, psychologically, physically, spiritually, right? They've infiltrated in every single layer of the I mean, just reality, right? And so when you've compromised the perception of reality itself to such an extent, well then, man, the members of the underclass, the vast swath of plebs and serfs, well, they'll usher in the agenda items for you on your behalf while they defend against, defend this dystopian agenda and the elite puppets and unelected bureaucrats implementing this very structured, dystopian reality. They will defend them, right? These perfect strangers against their own blood relatives and family who they should have their best interests at heart, considering and instead, yeah, they will be effectively mind controlled and forced into this manufactured consent and facilitate, some of the worst policies you could ever even imagine, just as far as ethically and morally. And this is what happens when really core values and the moral foundation has been infringed upon for such a long period of time, such a just a extraordinary extent. But anyway, guys, who knows, man? I could talk forever. I feel very tired today. My mind feels like it's somewhat inefficient at this moment. But I made it this morning, you guys. I hope all is well with you. And there is plenty of more that I had queued up that we could actually discuss. But I definitely know one of the things we'll have to get into in the near future will be, first of all, I have so much in regard to the Delta Project and the Hermes connection and the Odyssey Network. I had no idea that the Delta Project, man, you have direct ties with Francis Sheldon and John Norman from the Odyssey Foundation. And thank you, Helper Crow. I will definitely do my best, take a few breaks. And I think, man, occasionally it gets to me. You know what I mean? I'll be honest. But I do my best to remain as objective as possible. I'm trying to provide some sort of layered conceptual outline of how power kind of functions, but I'm trying to figure it out for myself, you guys. Like that's what I'm trying to do on a daily basis. It's something that I'm very passionate about. It's something I hope to attempt to, reveal more of these details to myself, and through that process I will potentially, at least have some sort of more, well, I would say just a better fundamental framework of kind of, again, I'm always very curious to know what the next stage will be, right? It's hard to predict always. It's very difficult. But once you kind of get yourself into this position where the veil falls to the wayside and you're no longer as naive and vulnerable, and also, I think it's when you're ideologically captured, you're surrounded by enemies, man. You have enemies everywhere you turn. And I'm really at this moment psychologically, I'm far more sympathetic to the vast majority of people who are not in power and are truly just being manipulated. As far as just their ability to kind of interpret the world stage and the power paradigm. I have much more sympathy for them than view them as my enemy. I think they've been compromised and coerced into embracing the worst ideas that only are self-defeating and truly they ultimately only affect us in a negative way, you and your family. But that is the goal, right? And so once you discover all of that, and then you no longer kind of fall for the blanket statements that play this game of black hats and white hats, and as if it's that easy to kind of, yeah, I think the best way to identify our common enemy is by acknowledging the true individuals pulling the strings, right? And so when you see that the mutual interests rely on you remaining covert, remaining behind that curtain, you know, and that therefore you remain insulated from any real accountability, then yeah, it's safe to say that I don't buy, especially considering layered clandestine operations that are very sophisticated in nature. I don't buy that there's some straightforward, you know, a single priority and motivation behind a lot of these, right, these consequential outcomes. I think much of it is clearly there's a group, right? There's very much like it seems as if they behave in this. We've mentioned it before. Some sort of um, clandestine intelligence and international intelligence apparatus that is in play that we refer to as the deep state. And yeah, and so again, once we're aware of the fact that they behave like a secret society, like a secret fraternal organization, and they truly do practice occultism, right? Then, what are we talking about when it comes down to ideological tools of division? Like, man, that's for us. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the vast majority of these the differences that separate us have been manufactured over time to create these divisions, societal divisions, to pit us against each other, to where we don't identify that very common enemy and actually come up with some sort of viable solution and hold some of these individuals accountable. Man, that's impossible in this current structured system. We blame our own family. I mean, you see people doing this. I mean, I've seen members of, just families being entirely divided, destroyed, no longer on speaking terms because of political, just as far as like, political differences and all of that in every way that I've seen it play out. It seems as if they're far less, knowledgeable on this alleged ideology that they embrace and now have assumed as their sole identity. Replacing God with this new ideology. That's what happens. I think it's this God hole phenomena where people are spiritually inept and psychologically, vulnerable, and there you kind of have this extremely dangerous, you know, kind of recipe for what could possibly, just as far as, you're primed and ready for manipulation at that point, and it very much it's a frustrating thing to witness. But again, man, that's all that I'm considering is that I think that a lot of this is a little more, it's more sophisticated than the vast majority of us are able to conceptualize, and that alone is somewhat terrifying. But it's the only way. If we have to acknowledge that and move forward with that in mind, or I I feel as if we're doomed to repeat the cycle, and that's what's so terrifying to me. But yeah, so very soon we'll definitely have to discuss this Delta project. The because man, once again, underground child pornography publication that's attached to this Delta project that's called Hermes, which catered to this brutal variety of pedophiles who, this publication, Hermes, it was circulated by the associates of Norman, right? Of John Norman, who is, he's the Odyssey Foundation, right? And so once you understand that, and allegedly, by the way, financed by this Francis Sheldon, who ties in North Fox Island, obviously directly. And so, aside from advertising child sex and pornography in the mail order services, Hermes also published articles instructing pedophiles on ways to infiltrate groups such as the Boy Scouts and church groups. So again, just like the finders, right? They're attempting to infiltrate babysitting services, you know, various child care organizations, and that is it's what they typically do. It's how they usually function. But I had no true understanding that there was a deeper connection here when in terms of the finders to the Odyssey Foundation in Dallas, which ties in directly to the Dean Corll murders. Which again, what do we have? Direct implication of John Wayne Gacy, who's a part of that exact network. But it's so strange. NAMBLA members as well. I didn't realize that. Basically, there was a report, a memorandum, and the FBI field office received a list that in man, it's very strange because it seems to outline, and this is in regard to the Tallahassee, Florida incident in the Finders case, but the list was recovered from a redacted subject and redacted by jail authorities at the time. They were booked into the Leon County Jail. And basically, the Bureau is requested to search and index all names appearing on the list and to advise Jacksonville and WFO of results of indices search. And what they discovered was it took almost a month for this request to come through. But then finally, as it came through, this information matched 3 names on the list. And this is all to do with the Tallahassee, Florida Finders case. 1 name on the list had been reflected in a Buffalo case file entitled Redacted, Alleged Members of North American Man-Boy Love Association, NAMBLA, Possible Murder Suspect. A second had been reflected in a Dallas case file entitled Redacted, Odyssey Foundation, Dallas, Texas, Child Prostitution. And a third appears as a member of the Odyssey Foundation in the Dallas file. And then I discover that 2 members of the Finders had been found transporting, of course, 6 children in the van through Florida to Mexico. But here's the different thing. Here's the interesting point. With a list of addresses for 1 individual named in a case of NAMBLA members suspected of murder and 2 named in a boy trafficking network looked at in connection to the Houston mass murders of Dean Corll in 1973. So, when you have a very well-established snuff network that are deliberately utilizing not only, a local network of facilitating this, as far as the publication and things. No. This was nationwide publication. And also they're using a Hollywood production company to then actually produce the snuff films themselves, which that is very fascinating in itself, especially understanding that you have this direct through line that you can kind of draw connecting in the Finders, immediately connecting the Finders in with this very same snuff network. So that is worth mentioning. And here in the near future, if we don't, at some point in the next few streams, we'll definitely have to focus on this specifically because it all falls in place. You understand Air America being utilized at the time, which was then, of course, which Marion Petty's son was with Air America, and Marion Petty was the game caller, of course, and the cult leader of the Finders, and his wife was a CIA employee, Isabel Petty, and his son, as I said, worked for Air America. The CIA cutout used to traffic heroin in the Golden Triangle region during the Vietnam War. Also, it was, of course, then passed off to Wexner and utilized in the Epstein operation. So very, very interesting connections there. And you also have Future Enterprises, which had provided software training for CIA employees. And an employee of the company named Robert Garter Terrell, Tobe Terrell, happened to be a member of the Finders until he was let go the very exact same month that the Finders case went public and the individuals were arrested in February 1987. So none of that is by coincidence or by accident. And so yeah, they've been hiding behind this clandestine curtain for so long that it's just to not understand that there is a very, very well established a policy of I think the CIA props up the black market in such a just deliberately, like this is in no, I think without the CIA the black market wouldn't function as efficient and effective as it currently stands. And so it's very interesting to realize how much the intelligence apparatus has to do with organized crime, and especially with widespread human trafficking, not let alone, arms smuggling and drug trafficking. That goes without being said, honestly, at this point. It's just the mere fact that people are, unaware of the direct implications that very much prove out that we have a state, a government, state actors who are facilitating the widespread abuse of children, and more than that, the organized abuse and murder of those children in many ways in ritualistic settings, which, yeah, you can tie that in with the butchering the goats that they found as far as the Finders members in the warehouse. They had found, a whole binders of that were dedicated to this ritualistic killing of these two goats, Igor, and I forgot the other name of the goat, but they're wearing all these ritualistic robes while they're conducting this animal sacrifice ceremony with the children. Had one of the children carve out, it was one of the animals were pregnant. One of the goats were pregnant, so they carved out the baby goats out of the pregnant goat as they killed it. It's like one of the most fucked up things. It's terrible, terrible stuff. And presented the head of the goat to one of the little children, very small children as well. And you know what their excuse was when they were caught doing this? Man, their excuse was that this was training the children in animal husbandry. Like, what an interesting justification while you're wearing occult robes and have an altar. And yeah, it very much is. I feel as if the CIA is, I think they're one of the, if not the most sophisticated network of child sex trafficking, as far as it can be directly tied back into a CIA operation to some degree, because the Finders seem to be that. So I'm not sure how many other examples of that we will discover on this path, but of investigation. But here we are, man. Yeah, the war for our souls. Exactly, Helper Crow. So anyway, you guys, yeah, they were teaching biology. What the fuck? That's so crazy. Would you say the CIA runs the world? I would say at this moment, they have implemented the structure of the current power paradigm. Absolutely. Yes. And so, yeah, if as far as like explicitly saying it is the CIA runs the, I don't know. I wouldn't blame every individual asset or agent within the agency. I would imagine it's a little more compartmentalized, but not really to any real extent. I wouldn't think, because as an organization, it's compromised. But all right, guys, I'm out of here. I've been running my mouth for too long. I'm exhausted. I need to go eat something and have a cup of coffee. Yeah. The City of London. We'll have to have that conversation. I think that the City of London and the Vatican obviously is still very much a vital role that is being played in terms of this sort of private intelligence network that's been established. But we'll have a conversation about the City of London. There's an awesome article that I'll bring to the table on one of these streams, and we'll dissect it a little bit and see if we can kind of get a little more of a working understanding, conceptual outline of how the real power structure, man, the clandestine power structure that hides behind that curtain. We'll try and continually expose that as much as we can. But hey, man, thank you so much, you guys. You're the best. I got nothing but love for you guys. You know this. Without you, I'd be just, man, I'd probably spin off the planet like I was Gary Busey, lose my damn mind, right? So I'd be either, consistently just forcing all of these ideas down my wife's throat and pacing around the front room, or or I'll actually apply myself and try and present this information as to the best of my ability, which, again, man, I hope to only improve and get better from here on out, moving forward. So I'll do my best, you guys. But I love you all, and I thank you all for showing up as always. And if at any point you have the means to support me, the best place would be patreon.com/the Underclass Podcast, and then yeah. Just follow me at the Underclass Podcast, and whichever episodes really resonate with you guys, share them with your friends, with people that I guess that you think would be receptive, obviously. But but appreciate you all, and I hope you have a great weekend, man.